Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma and addiction. My name's Ash and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today in the chair, dialing in from Boston in the USA, we have Gill Tietz. Gill got sober back in November 2019 and is the host and creator of the Sober Powered podcast. Gill is now a passionate advocate in the sober space and is dedicated to educating people on the impact of alcohol. With a background in science, Gill provides insight into why it's so hard to stop drinking and why alcohol is often correlated to anxiety and depression. Having recently celebrated 3 years of sobriety, Gill also has first-hand experience in how to live a rich and full life in sobriety and how to develop the life skills you need to stay sober. Gill, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you for coming on and all the way from the US. It must be the afternoon there, I imagine.
Yes. Yeah, I had to think about it for a minute.
What time of day is it? Yes, well, it's 7 a.m. here, so dialing in from the future, but it's wonderful to be able to connect. So thank you again for being here. Now, Gill, I wanted to start off by congratulating you on reaching your 3-year milestone. I'd love to know, how did that feel, and did you do anything special to mark the occasion?
Thank you. Yeah, it felt weird. It was like sad and anticlimactic at the same time, but I felt that I should be excited about it. So I think I put a lot of pressure on myself. We took a little 3-day trip into the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And it was really nice. We did some hiking. We went and checked out the little towns and we had a nice cozy Airbnb. But yeah, milestones are always weird for me. They're always kind of sad. And then a few days later, I feel back to normal. I don't know if you experience that too.
It's so funny you say that, Gill. I have the exact same experience. So I've celebrated 2 milestones. I'll be coming up to my 3rd very soon. And both times, exactly what you said about the week leading up, I start to feel a sense of mourning and a sense of loss and maybe a little bit of grief for my old life. But it doesn't stay around for long, because I'm very quickly reminded of all the gifts that come in sobriety and how much happier I am now in this current life. But yeah, it's really interesting. Why do you think that comes up?
I feel like it brings up a lot of bad memories, like you said, and you're kind of reflecting. When you can't celebrate 3 years without also acknowledging 3 years ago, which when someone stops drinking, it's usually for a good reason. So it was pretty bad 3 years ago. So I think it's that. And I think it's also we expect a lot of people to be excited and proud and throwing a parade and sending us all these texts. And we know they're not going to. And then they don't. And then that can make it kind of
disappointed.
Right?
It's such an interesting point that you make. I don't know. I have a couple of friends who have been really amazing rallying around me, and I am a bit of a celebratory person. I love to get around any sort of event or milestone or birthday, whether that's sobriety or belly button. But there is something about, I think, until you've gone through a 12-month period and you know just how hard it is to stay sober each and every day, perhaps people don't recognize just how huge that can be for some of us.
They think it's okay, it's like deciding to be vegan and then celebrating your vegan anniversary. It's no one would really care about that, right? So people view it as a lifestyle change. Why you change your lifestyle? Woohoo, great.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. So, Jill, before we dive into our topic today, which is emotional sobriety, I'd love for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. So could we start off by having you share with us exactly where you're from, what you do for work, and what you like to do for fun?
So I'm from the Boston area. I am a podcaster and I own a podcast network. So I also have 5 other top podcasts in my network and I help them with marketing and monetization. That's my main thing that I do. And for fun, that is hard. I work a lot. I know work isn't fun, but I like to lift. I like to go to concerts. I like to travel. Pretty standard stuff. I love video games. Maybe that's my number one. Video games are my best source of fun. I could do that all day, every day. I wish I could be like a professional video game streamer.
Gamer. Yeah. Maybe one day. Tell me, what were you doing prior to getting sober? Did your life look quite different?
Yeah, I was a biochemist. So I had a lab job. So I would go to work every day and I would work in a lab and go to meetings and give a bunch of presentations on data that I had collected. And so I did the typical 9 to 5 grind. Now I do the 24/7 grind.
It's so true. But then the interesting thing is when you're doing something that you're so passionate about and that you love, it doesn't really feel like work at all.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, what else would I be doing?
Yeah. Oh, I feel exactly the same way. Okay. So tell me, most people don't generally get sober unless they're struggling. They're struggling to manage their alcohol consumption and the world around them. So can you tell me a little bit more about your history with drinking and what led you to decide to give up alcohol for good?
Yeah, so I was a binge drinker and a daily drinker. So I drank every single day and then I would binge usually like on the weekends. I like to go to brunch, so I would start pretty early, which then just inevitably, when you can't stop, it leads to a lot of alcohol consumption on those days. And I thought I was drinking to have fun and connect and be social. That's what I told myself. And I also thought that I was a very fancy wine connoisseur. We used to go to wine tastings and I thought I was so classy, you know, chugging all the wine at the wine tasting.
Yep.
But really what I was doing was drinking to deal with anything. Like I couldn't handle feelings. I would get very overwhelmed easily. I would feel out of control all the time. And because I had no control over my drinking, I was frequently having way too much. I always wanted to moderate and be, you know, the classy drinker that we see on the TV. And I could never figure that out. And I would beat myself up for not being able to moderate. And then try to come up with this crazy plan to do it because I thought, like, breaks aren't going to help me. I have to practice moderating. That's going to help me. So I thought the daily drinking was a good thing. It's funny, like, how much we convince ourselves, like, what we're doing is good and okay. But ultimately, I quit because I became really suicidal at the end. I came into drinking already not liking myself. And then when you let yourself down day after day after day for years, you really, really hate yourself by the end of that. And I had depression coming into it as well. So that just continued to get worse. So eventually I felt very, very suicidal and it scared me enough that I quit. I had an experience where I did 90 days off. I was trying to cure myself so that I could moderate, but really what I learned is that the drinking resulted in the suicidal thoughts because when I did those 90 days, I didn't feel that way. I still didn't like myself very much, but I didn't have those hateful thoughts. So when I went back to drinking and realized I was not cured and the suicidal thoughts came back, that helped me accept that things will never be different. And then about 6 months passed of the same routine of drinking and hating myself. And then I could finally let it go. But I had to have that proof that nothing was ever going to change, no matter what.
Absolutely. What were your friends and family saying to you around that time? Did they think that you had a problem with alcohol?
No, which is weird. And I had a lot of resentment about that. in the beginning, and I still like have a twinge of it, although I've let it go mostly. But yeah, no one said anything, and they observed some pretty serious drinking and blacking out and crying in public and getting sick in public. Like, they observed a lot of stuff, a lot of not normal behavior, and no one ever said anything to me. And everyone, I think because I had a master's degree, I had a good job, I had a good marriage, I live in a house, I'm not in debt, because I had all of these things that are like viewed as good in society, no one thought my drinking was really a thing, because my life wasn't falling apart.
That's right. It's like you had all of the externals looking okay, so nobody thought to look to the internals where all of that pain was actually residing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience. And it's so crazy, isn't it, that alcohol as a drug is so normalized within our society. If you'd been using, say, heroin or another Class A drug and having the same effect, people would have stopped you. But we seem to have this acceptance around alcohol as a society that that's just normal, or that's okay, or that's how we blow off steam, deal with life, and it's just not correct. For somebody who can't manage their drinking, it's not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, it's not necessary. That's how I view it now. Like, a lot of people will say that they want to eventually try to moderate and learn to control it and all that stuff. And I think, like, why bother? Why is this thing so important? Like, you can learn to have a full, happy life without it. It's just a stupid drink. And we attach a lot of meaning to the stupid drink. But in the end, it's just a drink in a glass like anything else.
I've never thought of it like that, but you're absolutely right. Now, Gill, I heard you speak recently about this concept of the rock bottom threshold, and I found this really intriguing. Can you dive into this a little bit deeper for us?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about their rock bottom moment and like, oh, I don't have to quit drinking, I haven't hit rock bottom. Or it's not like I hit rock bottom and I'm homeless under the bridge drinking. And we view that as like the only option for rock bottom. But not everyone is capable of reaching that point. Like, for me, my rock bottom moment was realizing that drunk Gill could act on those really scary thoughts. And for someone else, that wouldn't be their rock bottom. Maybe their rock bottom would be acting on the thoughts, or maybe their rock bottom would be before mine, just like waking up, having another day hungover and throwing it away. So we all have a limit to how much just crap we can handle in our life, and everyone has a different limit. Some people have a very, very high tolerance for suffering. So those are the ones that will get closer to the traditional rock bottom. But not everyone is capable of getting there. Like, for me, I don't think I would ever get there. I was shocked out of my denial, and I realized, like, whoa, I cannot do this. But for some people, it takes a lot of proof and suffering to get over the hump and come out of denial.
I've heard the saying before, that some people's bottoms have a basement. They just keep going. And it's true. Do you think that adverse experiences throughout childhood would contribute to that bottom being greater for some people, or people having, as you said, that higher tolerance towards suffering?
Absolutely. Childhood trauma can change a lot of things in the brain, but one thing that it does is it can make drugs and alcohol more pleasurable for you. And it can enhance the rewarding effects, like whatever it's doing for you. Having a history of trauma, especially childhood trauma, can enhance those effects. So if you are, I've read a study about people doing morphine, and they had a group of just regular average people and a group of people who had experienced childhood trauma, and neither group struggled with addiction, which I think is important to say. The people who were just regular old people, they had morphine and they felt nauseous and like uncomfortable and tired. And the group with childhood trauma felt euphoric. So it really changes your brain, and it changes the perception of drugs and alcohol. And if things feel better for you, you're going to want to do it more. Like if alcohol made you nauseous and tired, you're not going to want to drink as much. You're going to go do something else. But if it feels amazing, you're way more likely to do it and continue to chase it because it's really solving whatever problem you're trying to solve.
I think you make such an incredible point there, and it's something that I didn't realize until I got sober, was that alcohol impacts people differently. And I could never understand how some people could just sit on 1 or 2 glasses of wine throughout the evening and even push the bottle away, whereas I was the complete opposite. If there was a bottle open, it had to be finished. There was no way I could leave it out on the table. And just realizing that like physiological instinct and response to this exact same substance can be so varied from person to person.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that everyone has a different experience. We think we all experience alcohol exactly the same way, and if you can't control it, that's your problem. But some people, alcohol is the most amazing feeling ever for us. Like, we don't get tired or sick. We have very limited hangovers. We're more likely to do it than the average person. So I think if everyone could understand that, then the stigma would start to be reduced.
I completely agree. Now, Gill, you made the decision to stop drinking 6 weeks prior to Christmas. And for many people listening, the Christmas and New Year period is a time of really heavy drinking. There's a lot of celebration, there's a lot of alcohol around, a lot of temptation, and a lot of triggers. What tips or advice do you have for somebody who's thinking about getting sober right now as we lead up into the Christmas period, or somebody who's maybe coming up to their first sober Christmas?
Yeah, this is very hard because there's the expectation that you have to drink. Especially like Christmas and New Year's, you have to drink. Like, how can I not have a glass of champagne, or how can I not have wine with Christmas dinner? So it's more than the usual trigger times. But I think the most freeing thing that I learned is you don't have to go to everything. We feel like we're going to ruin everyone's time if we don't go, or we're going to look selfish, or everyone's going to have this opinion, but really nobody cares. They might feel some sort of way about it briefly, and then they're going to move on with their life. So if it's a party that you don't think you want to go to because it's a lot of drinking, just don't go. That one helped me a lot. And realizing like people are going to be just fine, whether you go or don't go, or whether you go and leave early. I think also having a plan for how you would handle certain situations so you don't have to react in the moment. Like someone's going to ask you, do you want a drink? Or if you have a water, someone's going to say, why aren't you drinking? Especially if everyone knew you as a drinker before. It's just a question that comes up. So I think I would plan how to answer that in a way that you feel comfortable. I just recommend saying, I don't drink, or like, I'm good, thanks, and keeping it simple. Because the more you say, the more like you allow the person to respond, because you're giving them so many things that they could ask you about or make a comment on. If you just say no thanks, there's nothing else for them to say. And my last advice is the Irish goodbye. And I've heard it also called the French exit. So I don't know if like every country has their version of this, but it's just when you leave and you don't tell anyone. And it's my favorite way to leave. Do you guys, is it the Australian?
So we call it, I'm not sure if this is across Australia or it's just within my friendship circle, we call it doing a Houdini.
Oh, I love that.
Where you just ghost, you're out the door, goodbye, but not saying anything.
Yep. Yeah, just disappear. And you can, I was talking to a friend last night and he said he used to do that. And if anyone says something, you say, oh yeah, I came over to say goodbye to you, but you were in a conversation and I didn't want to. Just peace out, just disappear and you'll be fine. And if you do that every time, then people just know you disappear at the end of the night, and it's not even like a question anymore. They're like, oh, yep, Gill must have left. She always disappears around 10 o'clock.
That's it. Did you have anybody, you mentioned that, I agree, people do ask you why you're not drinking. Did you have anyone really try and challenge you?
Oh, yeah. The worst one, I was actually still drinking, and it was my very last moderation strategy that I tried was to not drink at parties, because I knew I just could not stop, and there's just free alcohol everywhere. So if I didn't start, I wouldn't have trouble stopping. So I would go to drinking parties and not drink as a daily drinker. It was crazy. I don't know how I did it.
Sounds so painful.
It was very painful. And I had someone give me trouble about not wanting a glass of wine. And she kept saying, like, are you sure you don't want wine? You love wine, though. Like, why don't you want wine? I'll go get you one. Like, are you sure? And over and over and over with the questioning. And in my head, I'm like, I really do want wine. I want 1,000 wines. And I just kept saying, nope, I'm good. Thanks. Yep, I'm good. Thank you. I'm good. Over and over. Because they're not looking for this sophisticated, special reason. They're just asking. And if someone's asking that much, they're probably on our team. And they're probably obsessed with alcohol and just, they can't even imagine why you wouldn't want to drink it. So that's more about them and their beliefs. They don't actually really care why you're not drinking. So I would just keep blowing them off. Nope. I'm good, thank you. Gotta go to the bathroom or gotta go talk to this person. But yeah, I did have a lot of pushback. I've had people put their drink right in my face and offer me a sip. So right where I could smell it. I've had people buy alcohol for me. It was hard in the beginning because I was the fun party friend, and I would be down to go out and get drunk whenever. Didn't matter what was going on the next day. If you wanted to go out, I was there. And people didn't realize, like, they did that with me once a month. They didn't realize that was my daily life. And they went out and partied once a month, but I was doing it all the time. So I think people just don't understand what's really going on. And once I got through like 6-ish weeks, people dropped it and stopped caring, and then no one ever cared about my milestones. No one thought about it at all.
And now with the work that you do, I imagine nobody would bother trying to get you back onto drinking again, which is awesome.
Yep, and no one asked about that either. They don't want to know.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think particularly I love what you just said about if they're on our team. Then, sometimes being around somebody that's sober while you're still drinking, if you have a level of unmanageability around your own drinking, then you don't want to be around that because it's uncomfortable and it forces you to have to look at things. And I understand that. It's each to their own, and everybody comes to the end of the road or, experiences their journey in a different way.
Yeah, and we think people are going to judge us for how much we drink, so we just don't want to be around high and mighty sober people. But I don't care how much you drink, I just don't want you to be miserable.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, exactly. Feel the same way there. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the work that you do. I'm a huge fan of the Sober Powered podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about how this idea came about and how you got started?
So when I first quit drinking, day one was just like surviving the hangover, which I'm sure is a lot of people's day one. But day two, I was like, okay, well, now we're sober forever. So what now? What now? And I really wanted to just understand if it was all my fault, because I believed everything that the stigma said. I believed that it was my fault, that everyone has the same experience with alcohol, and because I couldn't control it meant I'm a loser. And I just wanted to know, why me? And is all of that true? So I just started reading about it, and because I am used to reading scientific literature for my previous job, I just started doing the same thing I would do with work and educating myself. It was really helping me understand why certain things were happening to me, like middle of the night anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And about like 8 months later, so it wasn't an immediate thing, I just had learned so much that I really thought that it would help other people if they could just know that same information. Like, not everybody experiences alcohol the same way. Most people don't know that. So I decided I have to share this with the entire world. And I thought like YouTube channel, podcast, or blog. And I didn't think people read blogs anymore. I wasn't sure. Video sounded horrible. So I settled on podcast, and I just figured it out. I launched it the same day. I just impulsively put it out there with like 0 followers, and I didn't want my friends and family listening to that. So personal, and they didn't care about any of my milestones, so I didn't want to share it. So I literally started with like nobody, and it was just a nice project to keep me sober and keep me learning, and I hoped that a couple people would listen and learn too and feel better for it.
And that's certainly been the case.
Yeah.
So you tackle some really fascinating topics on the podcast, and one in particular is the one that I'd love to discuss today, and that is one of emotional sobriety. So can you explain for our listeners, what does emotional sobriety actually mean?
It means being okay with how you feel and not needing to do something to make it go away, which is really hard. A lot of people might think like, yeah, I'm fine with how I feel. But are you? Or when you have a negative emotion, are you immediately trying to do something to reduce it or change it? It's all about acceptance, really, which is what sobriety is about. Accepting the way that you feel with no judgment and without trying to fix things or stuff them down.
Because it's not just alcohol that we do this with, is it? I know for me, what I've noticed is that I might have stopped drinking, but I now look to other things that can help to fill what I call the God-shaped hole that sits inside me. When I'm feeling empty or irritable or discontent, then I look for those things. And if it's not alcohol anymore for me, it can be shopping, it can be food, it can be relationships. But it's really about not leaning into any of those cruxes and just knowing how to sit with yourself, right?
Yeah, and that's really hard to learn. And if you were a problem drinker, you probably never learned those skills. And even if you kind of knew them, you completely stopped practicing them for years and years and years. So you're very rusty. But we have to learn, first of all, like, what am I feeling? A lot of us, we don't even have the vocabulary to describe the way that we feel. We have like good, bad, fine, happy, sad, mad. We have very basic words, and we can't access the way that we feel. So if you're not even understanding what's going on, how can you deal with it without stuffing it down? So I think first we have to understand like what these feelings are, and then we can start to figure out like where they're coming from and what our triggers are. And if you can be curious instead of like freaking out and needing to make the feeling go away, you'll learn something from it.
So how would you recommend somebody start that journey if they're at the beginning of this point of self-inquiry, they want to develop their emotional sobriety? What would you suggest as some tools or some techniques or avenues that they could go down?
So what helped me in the beginning was like really my first year of sobriety, but especially the first 6 or so months, I was very, very angry all the time. I would have very intense rage pop up, and it was so much like I could barely function, and I didn't know why. It just felt so random. So what I did is I started retracing my day, and I would just go step by step. Like before I started talking to you, I was talking to my husband. Okay, was I mad when I was talking to my husband? Yeah. What did you do before that? Before that, I was trying on a bunch of clothes. Were you mad when you were doing that? Yep. Well, what were you doing before? Before that, I was at the mall. Were you mad then? Yeah. And you just keep going back until you identify the point where you weren't feeling that. And then you know the very next thing that happened is when the trigger occurred, whatever it was. So That will help you understand like what kind of people get you. It might be the same person every single time making the same comment, or it might be something happening that makes you feel a certain way about yourself. But if you can identify the moment in time when the feeling started, you'll get a lot of information, because feelings don't just randomly appear for no reason. There's always a reason, and identifying the exact moment will help, and it'll also stop you from being impulsive too. We're usually very reactive, and something happens and we immediately react to it and do something, which is bad. Usually that's like drinking, yelling at someone, rage quitting our job, like all kinds, sending an angry email or a text and regretting it. So if you can start retracing it, you're going to give yourself time to calm down. So when you do respond to whatever it is, it's in a way that you want to respond and you don't look like an angry, reactive person. So I would just start there, retracing your steps and then expanding your vocabulary of feelings.
That's some really awesome practical advice. Thank you for that, Gill. I'm going to be using that myself, I think. I heard a little while back in the beginning of my sobriety this idea that we stop developing emotionally the age that we begin drinking. Now, for me, that was 12. I'm not sure how old. How old were you when you first started drinking?
I was actually 22.
Okay, so you're doing a lot better than I am. So can you unpack that a little bit for us? Why do people say this, and what are we doing throughout those years that's stunting that emotional development?
When you're drinking all the time, you're not learning any skills at all. And it doesn't have to be drinking. It could be an eating disorder, self-harm, over-exercising. It could be something else self-destructive that maybe eventually leads into drinking, which was my case. I started with other things and then drinking just was better. So I stuck with that. But when you're doing these things to reduce the out of control feeling that you have when you have any kind of emotion, you're not learning any skills. So you're pausing your maturity and your development right there. And then when someone comes out of drinking, we'll use you as an example. When you come out of drinking, you're whatever age with the skills of 12-year-old you. Which can feel super uncomfortable because 12-year-old you probably didn't have the best skills, which is why you started drinking. So we have to very quickly learn these skills and learn to take care of ourselves. But basically it's that we can use alcohol or whatever it is to control the way that we feel at all times and to instantly change the way that we feel. So we never have to learn any tools. So we're always just relying on alcohol to do everything for us. And when you can't do that anymore, you don't know how to deal with things for real. And that's why it's easy to go to shopping, food, over-exercising, sugar, because you can use those to also control the way that you feel. Not as good maybe, but good enough. So we have to be very careful of transfer addiction. And it's all about just being willing to learn and grow. But yeah, it does stop, because there's no reason to learn any tools or coping skills if you have alcohol.
I've also heard you talk about this concept of distress tolerance. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yes, I love this one. I think the best example is, have you ever seen, or maybe you've done it yourself, something tiny happens, little, and this person flips out, like they throw a fit. Then you might be like, whoa, like what? That was nothing. Like for me, the worst one that I ever did, I broke my sunglasses, and they were really old and cheap. And I freaked out so bad. And it's for a few reasons. It's because things keep building and we don't know how to take things off of our plate and deal with them. But it's also this idea of distress tolerance and like how much you can handle before you give up or try to go to something external to cope. So An example would be like stress at your job. Some people will go through the whole day and they'll have stress, but they can dismiss it and, whatever. They can change their perspective. They have a good tolerance for stress. Someone else, any little thing that happens is a big deal for them, and they just cannot handle it. And those people are more likely to drink, because the more out of control that you feel, the more that you need to go to something external to bring that down. And that can be increased too. You can increase your distress tolerance and your ability to handle stress and bad things with tools. Of course, I'm always going to say learn some tools, but
Definitely. Okay, so let's segue to the tools then. I've heard you talk about ideas such as practicing the pause, journaling, improving your diet, exercise, sleep, and the final one I thought was really interesting was boundary setting. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you implement each of those into your daily life?
Yeah, so all of those may have just sounded really stupid to anyone listening to this, and that's because things that actually help you with your growth and your maturity and your tolerance for stress and discomfort are stupid things. And they feel stupid because they don't immediately fix your problem. And in like real life, you can't immediately change the way that you feel. You can't. And we're so used to doing that and having like instant gratification 24/7. So it's very hard to switch over to do these things that don't feel that they're helping in the moment, but they help future you. So I think the best one to start with is pausing and trying not to be so reactive. When you're very reactive, first of all, it makes other people uncomfortable because you're blowing up at them or freaking out and misjudging situations, but you're also not acting in a way that makes you feel good about yourself. So I think when something happens and it upsets you, it's really important to not do something about it right away so that you can calm down and then look at it with a fresh perspective and not a freaked out, overwhelmed perspective. And I'm really guilty of it too. Like, someone will troll me on social media and I'll see it and I immediately want to tell them what I think. And then I'm like, okay, no, first of all, don't do that. But even just giving yourself an hour will make a huge difference. And that helps you move from being reactive to proactive. Journaling, I think there's different ways of doing that. When I first got sober, I wrote an entire memoir. I didn't publish it. It was so dramatic. It was the worst memoir ever. It was so bad. I think I got to like 55,000 words. Like, it was a full book.
Wow.
But it was filled with drama and immaturity and just craziness. And I read it like a year later and I was like, this needs to be destroyed. But getting it out there and processing your feelings and your experiences can help. And you don't have to I don't recommend showing anybody. Write your memoir, keep it to yourself until, a year or two later. But that was a big help for me. And taking care of yourself is big. Like diet, exercise, sleep, boundaries. We don't know how to do those things that well. Like we're just kind of doing what we think feels good to right now's version of us, which is skipping exercise, eating unhealthy food or getting takeout, and staying up late. And then that sets future us back. So I think being mindful of your lifestyle too can really help. And there's a lot of people I've been realizing that don't fully understand boundaries and why they're important. I think that as a millennial, I'm very fortunate that now boundaries are kind of cool and people talk about them a lot. So I came into my adult life knowing what a boundary was and why it's an important thing. But people, especially in previous generations, especially women, we don't know what boundaries are. And a lot of women think they need to be more compassionate to other people and not even think of themselves. Like, a lot of people will think boundaries are selfish. And boundaries are not selfish because it just takes care of your mental health. It shows people how they can treat you, what's okay and what's not okay. That doesn't mean that you're selfish or you don't care about people. It just means you're showing people, when you talk to me about politics, I don't really want to hear your opinion. I disagree with you and I don't like talking about it. So a boundary would be, I'm not discussing politics with you, or I'm not discussing my not drinking anymore with you. So boundaries aren't like, you are the worst person ever, I don't care about you. It just protects your mental health and it protects the relationship. And I think a lot of us are people pleasers, and it's so hard to learn boundaries. It's so hard, but they're really, really, really important.
The foundation of any healthy relationship, and I agree, it's something that I've definitely had to learn how to do. I came into recovery as a chronic people pleaser, which I then later discovered was just my way of being able to manipulate everyone, and having my eyes open to that, being able to have my voice heard and feel safe, and also knowing that it's not about the other person being wrong. It's just about, as you said, protecting your own mental health and staying within your own hula hoop, as I like to call it. And also what you said about just your overall well-being, it reminded me of what we were talking about at the top of the show, where people can have different levels of tolerance to suffering. I know for myself, I could wake up day in, day out, hungover, and carry on with life, and that became my new normal. And it hasn't been actually until my 3rd year of sobriety now that I've started to realize just how good I can feel by getting the right amount of sleep, by really paying attention to the foods that I'm eating and eating to nourish my body rather than to get a feeling from the food. It's just all of these little things that I'm changing. I quit smoking. I did all of those things that I needed to do, and it hasn't been a quick turnaround. As I said, it's taken a few years, but I'm now coming into this time in my life where I'm the oldest I've ever been, but I feel the best I've ever felt. And that's, again, it's just such a testament to being sober and being able to connect into self and actually really acknowledge how I'm feeling.
I love that, and congrats on quitting smoking, because that's very, very challenging.
Thank you. In a way, I'm glad I went to a rehab where we weren't allowed to smoke. And so that was the circuit breaker for me. I did have a moment where I wobbled about 2 years into my recovery, and through, again, not being able to manage my emotions, I looked for a crux and I turned to that for a few months. And I'm so grateful that it was just a few months, but absolutely giving it up that second time was really hard.
Yeah, I bet. I know people that are trying to do that, and while I don't have that personal experience, I can see how challenging it is for them.
Gill, what advice would you have for our listeners who are really struggling to stay sober? They've started the journey, they've been in a cycle of relapse, and they just can't seem to make it stick.
I think if you're having trouble staying sober, you need to add something else to what you're doing. So a lot of us feel that we should be able to do it by ourselves, or that we're supposed to do it by ourselves. But if that's not working, continuing to try it is going to likely continue to result in, what you always had. So instead, just adding something. Try a meeting. Go to therapy. Switch therapists if you need to. Join a group. There's so many different things that you can do to improve your odds of success. I think of it as like the cliche, like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Like, just do whatever you can and try it and see if it works. And if it sucks and you don't like it, you don't have to do it again. But I think being open to try new forms of support and recognizing that, like, you need to grow and change and mature through this experience, and being open to just looking at your thoughts and your behavior objectively, I think all of that can really help. But if it's not working, add one more thing and see if that helps. And if it doesn't help, add another thing, and just keep trying different things until you find the form of support that works.
It's right, isn't it? Just don't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Try different things. There are so many support programs and different ways of being able to tackle sobriety. That brings me to a question that I'd love to ask you about your own sobriety. How do you maintain that today? What does it look like for you? Is there specific rituals? Are there particular tools? How do you maintain your recovery, Gill?
So I go to therapy, and I've been with the same therapist since 4 months into my sobriety, so a long time. And therapy helps me because it helps me make connections that I couldn't make on my own because I'm too emotionally connected to my own life to really look at the big picture sometimes. And it's really helped me learn this maturity. I think I still have a ways to go, but I'm much more mature and calm and stable than I was a few years ago. I think that you want to get to a point where things don't have power over your mood, where something can happen and you don't have to freak out because of it or get super angry. Like sometimes that's going to happen, but it shouldn't happen all the time. So I really worked on emotions and tolerating them. And I have some sober friends in real life now. That's very hard to find. That took me about 3 years to find those people. But even if you don't know where the sober people are, your friends are important because you want to have friends that encourage you to be better, not who, make it okay for you to do unhealthy behaviors. You want friends that also want to grow and be better and be healthy because that inspires and motivates you. So even if you can't find sober people, just go find different people. And if you go do different activities besides hanging at the bar, you will find some new people, like go to the gym or go to a martial arts class or something, and you'll make friends there that have different priorities than drinking and partying.
Absolutely. Gill, there's one final question that I love to ask my guests, and it's in relation to this idea that we need to put our recovery first. If recovery doesn't come first, then nothing else comes after it. And so I'd love to know, what are 3 non-negotiables that you implement in your life today that allow you to live happy, joyous, and free within your recovery?
The first one is my bedtime and my wake-up time. Those are critical for me. Sometimes, I'll be at a concert or my husband is out late and I want to be up for him, but 99% of the time, my bedtime must be preserved because it really has a big impact on my happiness level. My second non-negotiable is my walks. I try to go every day, but now it's getting colder here, so it's a little harder. But I try to do something where I can get some peace every single morning. And then my third one is kind of a weird one, but I really like to play video games, and I like to have my time to just disconnect and do my favorite thing. And again, it's like peace, even though the video game might be high energy. But I try to get some peace in my day 2 times a day. And sometimes the peace is chatting with my husband at night or playing a video game, or that one's more open. But I try to get peace 2 times a day, morning and night.
I love that. That's beautiful. Gill, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time to come onto the show today. As I mentioned, you are an incredible wealth of knowledge in a multitude of areas relating to addiction and recovery. So if our listeners wanted to find out a little bit more about you, where can they go?
So you can go to soberpowered.com and you'll find my podcast there. It's also called Soberpowered. And if you want to check out the shows in my network, you can go to soberpoweredmedia.com.
Incredible. I'll make sure that I pop all of that information in the episode show notes as well.
Thank you.
Gill, we say here on the podcast that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. So thank you so, so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.